Sometimes, the things we lose are only taken away to lead us somewhere we were always meant to find. The rain came down in long silver lines that night, tapping against the cracked pavement like a quiet warning no one else seemed to hear as Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the driveway, his shoulders still, his jaw set, while the front door behind him shut with a final, hollow click that echoed deeper than it should have, his twin boys, Liam and Noah, clinging to either side of him beneath oversized jackets, their small sneakers already soaked through as water pooled around their feet. Neither of them cried. Not yet. They only looked up at him with the kind of silent question children ask when they trust you to make sense of something that makes no sense at all. And Ethan, a man who had once navigated oceans in total darkness, found himself with no answer, no direction, only the steady rhythm of rain and the weight of everything he had just been told he no longer had. No home, no place, no right to stay. The porch light flickered once before going out, leaving the yard wrapped in a dim gray glow from the street lamp across the road. And beside them, Rex stood unmoving, his broad frame outlined in shadow, rain sliding off his thick coat as his ears remained high, alert, not to the voices that had faded behind the door, but to something else, something quieter, something buried beneath the surface of the moment. Ethan reached down, resting a hand briefly on the dog's neck, a habit formed from years when silence meant survival. "We're all right," he murmured, though the words felt thinner than the cold air around them. Rex didn't respond the way he usually did, didn't nudge or lean. Instead, he stepped away, slow at first, then with purpose, moving toward the far edge of the yard where an old rusted fence leaned crookedly into the weeds, his nose low, tail steady, as if following a trail no human eye could see. Ethan frowned slightly, watching the boys shifting closer to him as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet earth and something older, metallic, hidden. Rex began to dig, not wildly, not like a dog chasing instinct without thought, but with a measured rhythm, paw after paw pressing into the softened ground. Each movement deliberate, focused, until the faint scrape of metal broke through the sound of rain. Ethan stepped forward, boots sinking slightly into the mud, his breath slowing as something inside him stirred, something distant, almost forgotten. Rex paused, then nudged at the spot, revealing the edge of a small object wrapped in dark, oil-stained cloth. The dog looked up, amber eyes locked onto Ethan's, not with excitement, not even curiosity, but with a calm certainty that felt almost human, as if he already knew what this meant. Ethan crouched down, his fingers brushing away the last layer of dirt before lifting the object carefully, the cloth unraveling just enough to reveal the dull glint of a key, old, heavy, engraved with a symbol that caught the faint light and held it. And for a moment, the world seemed to quiet around him, the rain softening, the wind easing, as recognition flickered at the edge of his memory. Something tied to a past he had never fully understood, something that had been waiting, patient, silent, until now. And as Rex stepped closer, pressing his side gently against Ethan's arm, it became clear that whatever they had just found had been meant for him all along. The key felt heavier than it should have, cold against Ethan's palm, as if it had been waiting in the ground not just for years, but for him specifically. And as he turned it slightly beneath the dim streetlight, the engraved symbol became clearer, a small crest shaped like a compass, surrounded by faint lines that resembled waves. Something about it stirred a memory he could not quite reach, like a voice heard through water. Liam tugged gently at his sleeve, his small voice barely louder than the rain, asking where they were going now. And Ethan looked down at both boys, their faces pale under the yellow glow, eyes searching his for direction, for certainty, and he forced a quiet breath before answering. "We are going somewhere dry first, because sometimes survival did not begin with answers. It began with warmth." They walked along the roadside, gravel crunching beneath wet shoes, Rex staying close but not distracted, his head turning occasionally as if listening for something still unfinished behind them. The town stretched out ahead in scattered lights and empty storefronts, Most places closed, the kind of night where even the air felt like it wanted you to keep moving. After nearly half a mile, they found a small overhang outside a shuttered hardware store, just enough cover to step out of the rain. Ethan helped the boys sit on an old wooden crate, wringing water from their sleeves with careful hands. Movement steady, controlled, the way he had learned long ago when panic solved nothing. Rex paced once, then settled near the edge of the sidewalk, facing outward, guarding, always guarding. Ethan leaned back against the cold brick wall, the key still in his hand, and for the first time since the door had closed behind him, he allowed himself to truly look at it, turning it over slowly, tracing the grooves with his thumb. And then it came, not all at once, but in fragments, a conversation. Years ago, a voice older, quieter, telling him something about a man who had left the ocean behind, but never truly walked away from it. A relative he had barely known, someone his father had mentioned only once before changing the subject. Ethan's brow tightened slightly as the pieces began to align. Not fully, not yet, but enough to shift something inside him. Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears forward, body alert in that familiar way that meant he had sensed something real, not imagined, not coincidence. The dog stood and stepped closer, nudging Ethan's hand with the key once, then turning his gaze down the street toward a narrow side road barely visible between two dark buildings. Ethan followed the direction slowly, his instincts stirring now, that quiet pull he had learned to trust even when it made no sense. "Stay here for a second," he said softly to the boys, though Rex did not move away. He simply waited, as if knowing this was not a moment to leave anyone behind. Ethan rose, slipping the key into his jacket pocket, and took a few careful steps toward the alley, the air shifting slightly as he moved, the scent of rain mixing with something older, something metallic again, deeper. This time, like it was not just buried in the ground but hidden in time itself. He stopped at the edge of the narrow path, looking down into the dim stretch where shadows gathered thicker than the night should allow. And for a moment, everything grew still, the rain softened, the distant hum of the town faded, and all that remained was the quiet certainty building in his chest that whatever this key belonged to was closer than he ever expected. The alley did not look like much at first, just a narrow stretch of damp pavement framed by aging brick walls that held onto the cold like memory. But as Ethan stepped deeper into it, something shifted in the air, a stillness that felt intentional, as if this place had been waiting in silence long before he arrived. Rex moved ahead of him without hesitation, his paws making soft, steady sounds against the ground, his nose low, tracking something unseen, something that pulled him forward with quiet certainty. Ethan followed, each step measured, his senses sharpening the way they always had when something important was just out of view. Behind him, the faint glow of the streetlight faded, leaving only the dim reflection of water pooling along the edges of the alley, the scent of wet stone and rust growing stronger, until Rex stopped abruptly near a section of the wall that looked no different from the rest. But his posture changed, ears high, body still, focused. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes scanning the bricks. And then he saw it, subtle, nearly invisible unless you knew to look, a thin outline where the mortar had been disturbed, forming the faint shape of a small metal door embedded into the wall. Half concealed by time and neglect, his breath slowed as he reached into his jacket, pulling out the key, the weight of it now making more sense than before. Rex let out a low, quiet sound. Not warning, not fear, but recognition. Ethan crouched slightly, brushing away the damp residue along the edge of the hidden panel until a keyhole revealed itself. Old but intact. Waiting, he hesitated for just a second, not out of doubt, but because some part of him understood that whatever lay beyond this door would change everything. Then he inserted the key, the metal sliding in with a precise fit that felt too perfect to be coincidence. And as he turned it, there was a soft, deliberate click, followed by a deeper sound from within the wall, like something waking after a long sleep. The panel shifted inward slowly, revealing a narrow compartment just large enough to hold a small box. Ethan reached in carefully, his fingers closing around the object and pulling it into the dim light. It was a weathered case, dark leather, worn smooth at the edges, secured by a simple latch that had not been opened in years. Rex stepped closer, his gaze fixed on it, steady, unwavering. Ethan opened the case, and inside, neatly arranged despite the passage of time, were documents, folded with care, along with a small metal tag bearing the same compass symbol as the key. His eyes moved over the papers, recognizing formal seals, signatures, and names that carried weight even before he fully understood them. His pulse remained steady. But something deeper shifted inside him, a realization beginning to take shape, not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. He had not been led here by accident, and as the rain outside softened into a quiet whisper, the world beyond the alley seemed to fall away, leaving only this moment, this discovery, and the growing certainty that the life he thought had been taken from him had only just begun to reveal what had always been holding back. The leather case felt steady in Ethan's hands, heavier now not because of its weight, but because of what it carried. And as he stood there in the quiet shelter of the alley, the faint sound of rain tracing along the pavement behind him, he opened one of the folded documents fully, smoothing it carefully beneath the dim light, his eyes scanning the lines with the same discipline he once used to read maps in the dark, each word revealing itself with deliberate clarity. Legal language, signatures, dates stretching back years, all tied to a single name that made his breath slow. Jonathan Cole, a man he had not seen since he was a boy, a man spoken of only in fragments, and then not at all. Yet here that name stood, repeated, formal, undeniable, tied to assets, properties, accounts, structures that extended far beyond anything Ethan had ever imagined. His fingers paused at one section stamped with an official seal, a designation of inheritance, his inheritance unclaimed, untouched, waiting, as if time itself had been holding in place until he arrived. Rex shifted slightly beside him, pressing closer, his presence steady and grounding. While Ethan turned to another page, this one containing instructions, precise and quiet, directing him to a location not far from where he stood now, a private office, a name beneath it, a firm that specialized in estate holdings. Everything about it carried a sense of order, of intention, as though none of this had been left to chance. Ethan closed the case slowly, his mind not racing but settling, aligning, the way it did when a path finally revealed itself after being hidden for too long. He stepped back from the wall, the hidden compartment still open behind him, and looked once more at the narrow space where the case had been kept all these years, protected, unseen. Then he reached forward and gently pushed the panel closed, the soft click echoing quietly as it sealed once again, leaving no trace behind, as if the secret had chosen to move on with him. Rex turned immediately, already facing back toward the street, as if he knew there was no reason to stay, and Ethan followed, the case held firmly at his side. When they stepped out from the alley, the night felt different, not warmer, not brighter, but clearer. The rain had softened into a fine mist, the streetlights reflecting off the wet ground like distant stars. Across the road, Liam and Noah sat exactly where he had left them, their small forms still, trusting, waiting, and when they saw him returning, both of them stood quickly, relief passing across their faces without a word. Ethan approached them and knelt slightly, placing a hand on each of their shoulders, his voice calm, certain in a way it had not been before. "We are going to take a short walk," he said, and though the words were simple, something in them carried direction, purpose. The boys nodded without question, rising to their feet. Rex moved ahead again, leading them down the sidewalk, past the dark storefronts and quiet intersections, until the shape of a modest building came into view at the far end of the block, its windows lit softly from within despite the late hour. A small brass sign mounted beside the door, catching the light just enough to be read. Ethan slowed his steps as they approached, his eyes fixed on the name engraved there, the same name written inside the documents he now carried. And as he stood before that door, the weight of the past, the present, and something far greater waiting just beyond it, settled into a single quiet truth that everything he thought he had lost had only been guiding him here. The brass handle felt cool beneath Ethan's fingers as he stood for a brief moment outside the door, not hesitating, but acknowledging the quiet weight of what lay beyond it, the kind of moment a man recognizes when a path finally shifts from survival into something more. Rex stood close at his side, still and attentive, while Liam and Noah hovered just behind him, their presence steady like anchors in a world that had felt uncertain only hours ago. Ethan pushed the door open gently and stepped inside, the warmth of the room meeting them immediately. Soft yellow light spilling across polished wood floors and shelves lined with neatly arranged files. The air carried the faint scent of paper and old leather, a place built on memory, order, and things that lasted. Behind a large desk near the back of the room, a man looked up, older, composed, his expression calm but not surprised, as if he had been expecting this moment, even if he did not know exactly when it would arrive. His eyes moved from Ethan to the boys, then briefly to Rex, and something in his gaze softened with recognition. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice measured, respectful, not questioning but confirming. Ethan stepped forward, placing the leather case gently on the desk, his movements controlled, precise. "I found this," he replied simply, and the man nodded once, as though that was all the explanation required. He opened the case carefully, his fingers moving over the documents with familiarity, pausing at certain pages, verifying, confirming, until he reached the final sheet, where his eyes lingered just a fraction longer before he looked back up. "You arrived sooner than we expected," he said quietly, and Ethan's brow shifted slightly. Not confusion, but attention. The man continued. "This estate has been held in trust for many years, with very specific instructions that included how it was to be found, and by whom." His gaze lowered briefly toward Rex, then returned to Ethan. "Everything here belongs to you." The words did not echo loudly. They did not need to. They settled into the room with a quiet certainty that carried more weight than volume ever could. Liam and Noah stood still, not fully understanding, but sensing that something important had just happened. Ethan remained steady, his expression unchanged on the surface, but inside, something shifted. Not shock, not disbelief, but alignment. As if a truth he had never known he was missing had finally found its place. The man turned the document slightly, revealing a figure printed near the bottom. Numbers that stretched far beyond ordinary comprehension. Assets, holdings, accounts that had grown quietly over time. Untouched, protected, waiting. "The total valuation currently stands just over $200 million, he said, his tone even, respectful. And for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, not because of the number, but because of what it represented. Not wealth alone, but restoration. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting briefly to his sons, then to Rex, who stood calm and unwavering, as if none of this surprised him, as if he had known all along where this path would lead. The man reached into a drawer and placed a small envelope on the desk, sliding it forward. "There is one more thing," he said, and Ethan picked it up, feeling the familiar texture of aged paper beneath his fingers. A final message, waiting to be read. And as he held it there, unopened, it became clear that the story was not about what had been found, but about why it had been waiting all this time. The envelope rested in Ethan's hand with a quiet weight that felt different from everything else in the room. Not heavier in substance, but in meaning, as if whatever was inside it carried something no document or number could fully explain. The man behind the desk stepped back slightly, giving space without saying a word, understanding that some moments were not meant to be observed, only lived. Ethan turned the envelope slowly, noticing the same compass symbol pressed into the corner, faint but deliberate, and beneath it, his name written in careful, steady handwriting that had not been rushed, had not been uncertain. Liam shifted closer, his small hand brushing lightly against Ethan's arm, not asking, just present, while Noah stood quietly beside him, eyes moving between his father and the envelope, sensing that this was something important in a way children understand without needing explanation. Rex remained still near the desk, his posture calm, his gaze steady, as if he had completed his part and was now waiting for Ethan to understand the rest. Ethan opened the envelope carefully, the soft sound of paper unfolding filling the silence. Inside was a single letter, aged but preserved, the ink slightly faded but still clear. He began to read, his eyes moving slowly, deliberately, taking in each word as if they were meant to be felt as much as understood. The letter spoke of time, of distance, of choices made and paths not taken, of a man who had built something not for himself, but for someone he believed would one day need it more than he ever had. It spoke of watching from afar, not with interference, but with faith, waiting for the moment when the person it was meant for would arrive, not because they were told, but because they were ready. Ethan's breath steadied as he read, the room around him fading slightly as the words settled into something deeper than thought, deeper than memory. The letter did not mention wealth in the way most would expect. It spoke instead of responsibility, of using what had been given to restore, to build, to create something that reached beyond one life, beyond one moment. It ended simply with a line that lingered longer than the rest. When you find this, it means you have already become the man I hoped you would be. Ethan lowered the letter slowly, his hand still, his expression unchanged on the surface. But something within him had shifted again, not in surprise, but in understanding. As if the final piece had quietly fallen into place, he folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Not as something finished, but as something carried forward. The man behind the desk spoke again, his voice gentle. There are properties, accounts, and holdings prepared for immediate access. Everything is ready whenever you are. Ethan nodded once, not rushed, not overwhelmed, just aware. His gaze moved to Liam and Noah, who looked back at him with quiet trust, and then to Rex, whose presence had been the first sign that something unseen was guiding them. Ethan placed the envelope and documents back into the case, closing it with a soft click that echoed with a different meaning now. Not an ending, but a beginning. And as he stood there in the warm light of the office, the memory of the rain, the closed door, the cold night still fresh behind him, it became clear that nothing had been taken from him that had not already been preparing to return in a way far greater than he could have imagined. The night had not ended when they stepped back outside, but no longer felt the same. The rain had faded into a soft mist that clung to the air like a memory refusing to disappear, and the street that once seemed empty now carried a quiet sense of direction. Ethan walked with a steady pace, the leather case secure in his hand, not held tightly out of fear of losing it, but with the calm assurance of someone who finally understood its place in his life. Liam and Noah walked close beside him, their small steps lighter now, as if something unseen had lifted a weight they could not name. Rex moved just ahead, not searching anymore, not tracking, but guiding, his posture relaxed yet attentive, as though his role had shifted from discovery to protection of what had been found. They turned onto a quieter street lined with older homes, the kind that held stories in their wooden frames and soft porch lights. And as they moved forward, Ethan noticed something subtle, something that might have been missed by anyone else. The way Rex slowed near one particular property, his ears lifting slightly, his pace adjusting until he came to a complete stop at the edge of the walkway. The house itself was modest in size, but well kept, its windows glowing warmly against the night, the front porch lights steady, not flickering like the one they had left behind. And there, near the base of the steps, mounted discreetly beside the door, was the same compass symbol he had seen on the key, on the documents, on the letter. Ethan's steps slowed as he approached, his eyes taking in every detail, the grain of the wood, the clean lines of the structure, the sense of care that had been maintained here over time. Liam looked up at him, his voice soft but hopeful, asking if this was where they were staying. Ethan did not answer immediately, not because he did not know, but because he understood that some answers were not spoken right away. They were felt. He reached forward, his hand brushing lightly against the doorframe, and in that moment, something within him settled, not in a sudden rush, but in a quiet, steady way that felt more real than anything loud or overwhelming. Rex stepped up onto the porch, turning once to look back at Ethan, his gaze calm, certain, as if confirming what had already been decided. Ethan moved forward, placing his hand on the handle, and when he opened the door, it did not resist. It did not creak or hesitate. It opened smoothly, as though it had been waiting inside. The air was warm, the lights already on, casting a soft glow across a space that felt lived in, prepared, not empty, not abandoned, but ready. The scent of clean wood and something faintly familiar filled the room, and as Liam and Noah stepped inside, their eyes widening slightly, not in shock, but in recognition of something they had not yet experienced but somehow understood, a place that felt like it belonged to them. Ethan remained at the threshold for just a moment longer, his gaze moving across the room, the furniture, the small details that spoke of intention and care, and then he stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, the quiet sound marking not an end, but a crossing, a movement from one life into another. And as Rex settled near the entrance, his body relaxed for the first time that night. It became clear that the journey they had begun in the cold rain had not led them to something new, but to something that had been waiting for them all along. The house held a quiet kind of warmth that did not come from the lights alone. It settled into the walls, the floors, the air itself, as if it had been lived in by intention rather than time. Ethan stepped further inside, his boots leaving faint traces of moisture that quickly faded into the polished wood, while Liam and Noah moved slowly through the space, their eyes taking in every detail with a mix of curiosity and something softer, something closer to recognition than surprise. The living room opened wide before them, furnished but not crowded, a couch set neatly near a stone fireplace, a folded blanket resting across its arm as if someone had just left it there. Waiting, the kitchen beyond carried the faint scent of fresh wood and clean surfaces. Everything in its place, everything prepared, not staged, not artificial, but ready for life to begin again. Rex walked calmly through the room, his nails tapping lightly against the floor, his nose lifting once, as if confirming what the space already seemed to say. Then he turned in a slow circle and settled near the center of the room. His body relaxed in a way it had not been before. Ethan noticed that, the way the dog finally allowed himself to rest, and he understood it without needing explanation. This place was safe, not because of locks or walls, but because it had been meant for them. Ethan set the leather case gently on the table near the entrance, his hand lingering on it for just a moment before he stepped away, not out of detachment, but because he no longer needed to hold on to it as tightly. Its purpose had already begun to unfold. He moved toward a small hallway that branched off from the main room, his steps quiet, deliberate, the boys following close behind. And as they reached the first doorway, he pushed it open slowly. Inside was a bedroom, simple but complete, two neatly made beds, identical, positioned side by side, with a small wooden dresser between them, a soft lamp glowing in the corner, casting a warm, steady light across the space. Liam stepped in first, his eyes moving from one bed to the other, then to Ethan, as if asking without words if this was real, if this was truly theirs. Ethan gave a small nod, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just enough to confirm what both boys were already beginning to feel. Noah moved closer to one of the beds, running his hand lightly across the blanket, his expression slowly from the street outside as the faint glow of early morning began to touch the edges of the horizon, a soft blue light replacing the darkness that had followed them all evening. Behind him, the house carried small sounds that spoke of life returning, the quiet creak of floorboards as Liam and Noah moved down the hallway, the soft rustle of blankets as they explored their new space with careful excitement, the steady rhythm of Rex's breathing near the doorway, calm and grounded, as if he had finally reached the end of a journey he had understood long before any of them did. Ethan turned slightly, his gaze moving through the room once more, taking in the details not as something temporary, but as something lasting, something meant to hold memories yet to be made. He walked back into the main room, where the leather case still rested on the table, its presence no longer heavy, no longer uncertain, but steady, like a foundation rather than a question. He opened it once more, not to search, but to confirm, his fingers brushing over the documents, the envelope, the symbols that had guided him here, and then he closed it again, gently, with the understanding that what mattered most was no longer inside it. It was already unfolding around him. Liam and Noah appeared in the doorway, their faces brighter now, no longer shadowed by confusion or cold, but warmed by something simple and powerful, a sense of belonging. Liam spoke first, asking quietly if they could stay here, and Ethan met his gaze, kneeling slightly, so he was at their level, his voice calm, steady, carrying a certainty that had been built through everything they had just walked through. "Yes," he said, and the words settled into the room with a quiet finality that felt stronger than any promise. Noah smiled faintly, not wide or loud, but real, and stepped closer, leaning gently against Ethan's side, a small gesture that carried trust without hesitation. Rex rose then, stretching slowly before walking over and settling beside them, his presence completing something unseen, as if the circle that had begun in the rain had now closed in warmth. Ethan stood again, his gaze moving toward the front door for just a brief moment, not with regret, not with anger, but with understanding. The past did not need to be revisited. It had already served its purpose. It had led them here. And as he turned back toward his sons and the quiet space that now belonged to them, it became clear that what had been taken from him had never truly been lost. It had simply made room for something greater to arrive. The morning light grew stronger, slipping through the windows and stretching across the floor, touching the walls, the furniture, the small details that would soon become part of their everyday life. And in that gentle, rising light, there was no rush, no need to prove anything, only the quiet beginning of something steady, something earned, something that had found its way back at exactly the right time. And as Rex lay down near the doorway, eyes half closed but still watchful, Ethan understood that some paths are not about finding what was hidden, but about becoming the person ready to receive it. And perhaps, in the end, the world does not forget kindness. It simply waits until the moment it can return in full.